poets were really seen as the spiritual, as prophets, as the spiritual leaders of society in many ways because of the power of poetry and music to move the soul. And when that battle is won with a person, what they do in the practical world will follow from, what their moral and spiritual base is. It was only in the early 1800s that this idea was promoted of the difference between what the Germans call Geisteswissenschaft and Naturwissenschaft. When my generation's sense of beauty and truth was undermined by this counterculture idea that the only important thing is how you feel, and there's a gap between how you feel and objective reality, and especially there's a gap between how you feel and what society tells you you're supposed to feel.
If the heart is allowed to be fully maturated and developed, that requires the development of the mind, the full development of the mind, and the full development of the mind isn't possible without the development and maturation of one's heart.
Right. Now, the problem was after World War II, there was a cultural shift in the United States and therefore in Canada and Western Europe and whatnot. There was such a desire to return to normality from the horror of that war that people hid in their domestic, private worlds, career, family, get a house in the suburbs, send your kids to college. My children are never going to have to undergo the suffering and deprivation that I did in the Depression and the war.
Welcome everybody to a new episode of Exiting the Cave. I'm your host, David Goslin, and I'm here with my good poet friend, Daniel Leach. Welcome back to the show, Daniel.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, so, one of our most popular films to date, The Devil at Woodstock, wouldn't have been possible without you, because you wrote the poem that the film was built around, The Devil at Woodstock. And, the anniversary is coming up, Woodstock. I mean, we're in summer now. Summer is in full swing. At least here in Montreal, we can feel it. The Jazz Fest. There's people everywhere. Montreal gets a bit wild in the summer. So yeah, we are getting ready for that because we do have a new feature that will be building on the last film, which we can maybe talk a bit more about after. But I figured we'd revisit a time long past because you have some intimate experience with that, which for the sake of our show, maybe we could just call the Woodstock Deception. Perhaps that will be the title of the show. So basically this is a show where we're going to trash hippies for 2 hours straight. No, that's a joke. But even better, we figured we'd bring on an actual former hippie to help us do that. So yeah, welcome to the show, Daniel. Tell us a bit about, what was it like? We're going to start out with a real normie, boring question. What was it like being, you were there on the ground? How did you get there? And what was the story?
Well, I should probably set the stage autobiographically, just briefly. I mean, I was born in 1953 in Buffalo, New York. I grew up in a working class factory town, working class, parents. Went to Catholic school, and I was a pretty normal teenage kid. It's kind of a jock at the time, but in the summer of 1969, there were leaflets and posters around about this concert that was going to occur in Woodstock, New York. As it turns out, it didn't occur in Woodstock itself, but all these amazing popular bands that we all loved were going to be playing there. It was the biggest collection of popular music that had ever been seen up until that point. And so I really, really wanted to go. I was only 16 years old. And some friends that were a year older than me who actually owned a car, I didn't even own a car, were going. And I bought tickets, and they said, "Sure, come with us." So five of us jumped into this old jalopy and drove uh, uh, 200 miles down to Monticello, New York, which I think was the closest town to it. Now, at the time, I didn't have long hair. I had never smoked marijuana. I didn't do any of that stuff. But the experience when I got there, I describe in the poem. If anybody's interested in reading the poem, it's a narrative poem in blank verse, very much in the style of Milton, and it's written as a tragedy. Um, it's meant to actually take one spiritually inside of the tragedy of my generation, which I use Woodstock as the stage on which to portray what led up to it and what came out of it. Now, the experience of it itself was rather moving at the time. It was a collection of, it's estimated, 500,000 young people from all over the place. There was not one episode of violence the whole time.
Yeah.
There were many, many examples. I mean, if anybody saw the movie or read about it, of people helping each other, people who were injured or sick or whatnot. A hippie commune showed up, and because there was no food there, there was no like, restaurants or food stands. It was out in the middle of a cornfield,
Right.
and this commune came and fed people, and there was nothing but goodwill and what appeared to be a loving attitude of everybody there, which was magnified by the experience of the music, which I won't say anything about it. It was um, all the popular artists that people know of now, but I was so moved by the what I intuited as the spirit of this, which I see now, was that there was a genuine aspect to it uh, that is precisely this feeling of community. That when I came back, I pretty much adopted the the whole persona and lifestyle of the hippies. Grew my hair long, grew a beard, uh, uh, and really began a process. I think I can date to then of a certain spiritual uh, searching, a spiritual journey, because I knew that simply the um, the uh, immersion in the music, in the drugs,
Hmm.
and in the more shallow aspects of what the counterculture was about was just not enough for me.
Mm.
Um, I think I was informed by a deeply Catholic spiritual identity.
Mm.
I felt that there had to be some higher purpose to life
Mm.
rather than simple, pleasure seeking.
Hmm.
And I began to write poetry around that time. It was terrible poetry. I began to read Eastern mystical philosophy. I read, many different spiritual and philosophical traditions. And around 19, I'm just giving this very short shrift, but I think it's
Oh
important
no, it's good. It's useful. I'm
to
listening.
understand where this where this poem came from. Uh, Around about 1974, 73, 74, 75, I became extremely disillusioned with the counterculture because it had degenerated by that point into nothing but pleasure seeking. There wasn't even the Vietnam War was winding down. So the protests of the war was really not energizing the counterculture movement with any real moral framework
Right.
or basis, and it had degenerated into pretty much uh, straight pleasure seeking. And then the epitome of that is the disco culture, right,
Right.
which was all about partying and drugs
Right.
and sex and
Right.
and
Cocaine.
that that's the point at which I said, that's the point I said, I'm getting off this train.
You
This is
came off
not
that
for me.
disco
But
train.
yeah, but as you can imagine, there wasn't much else in my life at that time to go to. So I bought a backpack. Well, uh, uh, yeah, right. It's around that time, 1974, 73 or 74. I bought a backpack, some camping equipment, and decided I was going to hit the road and hitchhike across the country and find myself. And
Classic. That's
yeah, it is
it's all the
classic.
time here in Montreal. That we're kind of a destination for Canadians who the backpack for
Right? Yeah.
run into them all the time.
And a friend of mine went with me. I was going to go alone, but he had just tried to commit suicide and was really a lost soul,
Mm.
just incapable of connecting to the world emotionally in any other way. And I said, well, come with me. Maybe it'll help you. And I wrote this, by the way. I'm going to send it to you. I wrote this in a memoir about that trip because it was a great learning experience
Mm.
because I met truly, truly special souls at every point along the way, and the contrast between my friend's inability to appreciate beauty around him, to appreciate the beauty of these people we were meeting who were helping us, taking us into their homes in some
Right.
cases, really made the experience of it that much more heightened for me because of the contrast. So I had the trip culminated. Again, this is something that's become reified now into what all the liberal spiritualists love to do. I ended up in a canyon in Arizona and taken out there and left overnight by these brothers we had uh, that we had linked up with. We stayed in their home, and I'm skipping over a lot, but I had a profoundly spiritual experience in that canyon that night. It was. I'll just briefly characterize it as the feeling of being a small part of a very large and beautiful universe, but being a a loved and protected uh, being. And that combination of feeling minute in the face of this sublime, if you've ever been in the desert and you look at the night sky, it will knock you on your ass.
Mm.
It is, the sublimity of it is beyond anything you've ever experienced. And the combination of that, of feeling, and Schiller, we'll talk a little bit later maybe about Schiller describes this as the feeling of the sublime in nature. You
Right.
feel small physically because you are small. I mean, we're little tiny things on this little tiny planet, which could be destroyed at any moment. Actually, we're physically completely at the mercy of natural forces, but yet there's a greatness in us that corresponds to this greatness in the universe. But the experience I was having at that moment was that I was also being loved by that.
Mm.
So it's a profoundly religious thing that I had never had in school or in church before.
Mm.
So I returned from that trip very much changed, but still not knowing, what my path in life was going to be. I thought about going back to school and getting I dropped out of college after 2 years, mostly out of just demoralization with the same kind of demoralization about the counterculture. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I'd go back to college, get an English degree, become an English teacher or professor because I loved literature and poetry
Okay.
full time. And it was about that time, and we don't have to go into it, but it's about that time I ran into representatives of Lyndon LaRouche's movement.
Hmm.
And this is what I will say about that is two things. Number one, it linked up in my mind. It brought together the concept of love of humanity as expressed through mankind's progress in uplifting, the human race through science, technology, increasing living standards, increasing lifespans, all the things that Western civilization has accomplished, which is driven by this intense creativity and love of this creative spirit in other human beings. I had never heard it expressed in those kinds of explicit terms before, and had it actually married to the political struggle against the evil principle. We'll get into this more later, which tries to suppress human creativity and nobility for purposes of control of humanity.
For now,
That
we'll call it the Zeusian principle for
the
now.
Zeusian principle, the oligarchical principle. You can also call it the satanic principle. And because it's a profound hatred of exactly what makes human beings precious, that they're made in the image of the creator, that had never been, in my mind, become clear how to express that in the real world. The only thing I could think of before that was, my God, how can we put a man on the moon? I mean, we landed on the moon the very summer that Woodstock occurred. Think of the irony of that.
Yeah, that's a great.
But in my mind, even as I was listening to, I think it was Country Joe and the Fish uh, at Woodstock, if I'm not mistaken, who sang a song "Monkeys on the Moon," which mocked the moon landing.
Right.
And I was thinking in my mind, but we can put a man on the moon. Why do we have starvation on our planet? It doesn't make sense. We have the ability to solve these problems clearly,
Right.
and yet they're not being solved. But when I ran into Lyndon LaRouche's movement, I understood finally that this was by design. This was deliberate. So I decided to join it and to get into the fight to try to rectify these things. I figured, yeah, a year or two, well, we'll solve these things, or we'll be on our way to solving them. Here I am, 50 years later, uh, actually 50 years exactly, and the struggle is still going on. So put that to the side. It was in LaRouche's movement that I discovered classical art. I mean, really discovered it. I've been aware in high school. I had a wonderful teacher in high school who taught a world literature course who introduced us to Shakespeare. Of course, he had Shakespeare in English anyway, but he introduced us to Greek tragedy, to modern, poetry. Um, he brought in records of Richard Burton reciting Dylan Thomas, things like that. Brought records of Beethoven symphonies in.
Really? Wow. What a great
Had us
teacher.
had us read Dante.
Wow.
So I was exposed to classical beauty, but I never understood its importance until I understood the political ramifications
Right.
of what art does to make this connection in the human mind between your actual identity as a creative being made in the image of the creator, which means you actually have a real connection to the universe. You're not just a meaningless speck.
Right.
And we can talk more about this later, but that's when I finally started to understand it. And that's when I was introduced. Oddly enough, I had somehow not been introduced to Keats and Shelley, my two favorite. They're my, pole stars of the
Right.
poetic world.
Me too.
Didn't discover them until much later in my late 20s. I got involved with that movement when I was 23, and so
I know I have to. I just so because I take notes and like because you pretty much set up already. We haven't even started, and you pretty much set up the whole discussion because I have a bunch of questions. You like this
yeah,
guy's going to elaborate on
there's a
that.
lot of
You have to elaborate on that because I do want to get the answers for these things.
sure
No, so
fire
this is
away.
great. Well, I mean, you're getting yourself in trouble now. You're going to have to stay and you're going to have to answer these questions. So, but thank you. That's great. So yeah, maybe just to throw one out, maybe we'll start with the last thing you said here because you talked about this question of translating the classics and knowledge of the classics uh, into the real world and into the you could say the modern world, right? Into your own modern situation. And yeah, and it wasn't clear until you thought about the political situation as well. First, an observation, I like that's one of the things that maybe academia has done, where it's divorced the kind of literary aspects or like the aesthetic aspects of a work, a classical work, from the actual historical context, right? And the identities, right? How these people of the composers and how they actually thought and their relationship to their world, which was the modern world at their time, right? Because there's always this idea of classics as being something in the past, but these authors were also relating to their own world and that relationship to their own past as well, right? So there's kind of a almost a
Well,
Gaussian, space time of,
yeah.
but just to say that in modern academia, it's kind of been divorced. Like the fact that Dante went on diplomatic missions. He died on his way to the Vatican, I believe. Petrarch was a diplomat ambassador for the Vatican. But you can go back. Aeschylus, was kind of a representative of the old Areopagus tradition, which had been undermined by the newer Democratic Party, led by people like Pericles and later, it's Casanovas like Alcibiades and all that, who had some interesting backgrounds and political connections. So that's all divorced, right? When people are studying the classics today, that doesn't help, right? But then
Well,
you went, you were able to even make the connection, and like, yeah, how'd that happen for you? Start
well,
there.
I can talk a little bit about this, but let me, one thing that's important that I did discover um, around that time is that this wasn't always the case, as you're pointing to. Poets were really seen as the spiritual, as prophets, as the spiritual leaders of society in many ways, because of the power of poetry and music to move the soul. And when that battle is won with a person, what they do in the practical world will follow from, what their moral and spiritual base is. It was only in the early 1800s that this idea was promoted of the difference between what the Germans call Geisteswissenschaft and Naturwissenschaft. Geisteswissenschaft is the spiritual, you know, the metaphysical world, if you will, the realm of poetry, music, and whatnot. Naturwissenschaft is the realm of practical knowledge, nature. Naturwissenschaft, knowledge of nature and the natural world, which is supposedly governed by
It's objective
mechanical,
laws.
materialistic laws. And this is where the notion comes from that classical art is, at best, something that people brings people peace and pleasure, a certain intellectual, pleasure, but doesn't have any practical value. Um,
Right.
and of course, nothing can be further from the truth. And the negative proof of this is, we can come back to it, what I wrote about in the Devil at Woodstock, which is when the my generation's sense of beauty and truth was undermined by this counterculture idea that the only important thing is how you feel, and there's a gap between how you feel and objective reality, and especially there's a gap between how you feel and what society tells you you're supposed to feel. Right now, the problem was after World War II, there was a cultural shift in the United States, and therefore in the Canada and Western Europe and whatnot. There was such a desire to return to normality from the horror of that war
Right.
that people hid in their domestic, uh, private worlds, career, family, get a house in the suburbs, send your kids to college. My children are never going to have to undergo the suffering and deprivation that I did in the Depression and the war,
Right.
uh, and protecting that, which there's nothing wrong with the American dream, and people advancing themselves, but it was done at the expense of actually considering what it's all about and what and what the purpose of the nation is. Why you do die for a sacred idea of freedom. Very important to to think about, especially with the 250th anniversary of the United States, which we're about to celebrate.
Right.
So these moral principles kind of got pushed to the background politically. You might think about it when you went to church, but that was about it. For an hour or two on Sunday. And my generation, because we were exposed to more, we had television, we were exposed to more information than any generation had before. Of course, it's nothing compared to now.
The poor kids.
we as we saw through the hypocrisy of what our parents' generation, the moral flaw in it. And because we accepted the idea of a binary, and this of course was aided and abetted by actual, as you've explored in great depth, by actual intelligence agency programs designed to do this to our generation.
Right.
We accepted the idea that this hypocritical authoritarianism of our parents' generation was one of two binary choices, the other one being, you might say that one being the Apollonian idea in classical Greek terms: order, law, authority,
tradition,
and the Dionysian principle, which is one of personal pleasure, no higher moral principles, and that is what ultimately, that was the flaw in the Woodstock generation. Had the Woodstock generation actually learned the real lesson of agapic love of one's fellow human beings, and been able to connect it to real action in the real world to improve the lot of mankind through the mission of a nation state, bringing the benefits of freedom to the entire world, that would have been good.
But or knowing how to do that, and that you don't actually just get that by dancing around and playing the bongos.
Yeah,
like you kind of you do have to make discoveries, and
so
and you can't just sing about humans being monkeys on the moon and then think that everything is going to get better.
So what I did in the poem was I created a reified person who has the aspect of a beautiful, a physically beautiful person, who suddenly is there on a hillside just off the main action at Woodstock,
right,
and sort of preaching to a group of people who have become entranced by his, because he speaks beautifully. He's like
this is a movie, by the way. This is a movie, right? I'm always thinking about, because there's different poems we read, and I don't want to stop, but just to say that, like, the complementarity between, today we have film. We didn't have film, when Keats was writing Ode on a Grecian, fortunately. But there is so much potential, right? In so many mediums. It's a powerful
medium.
It's crazy. And we are not going to go down a rabbit hole as to why none of the many great ideas that could be done never seem to get done. And then some creepier stuff always seems to get done. But yeah, the idea of the devil at Woodstock, and that's a movie right there. Now that I make film, I'm hearing that, and I'm like, if this kid on Reddit can get a movie like Backrooms done, that's like making hundreds of millions of dollars, and he was just with his video camera, and he's in film school, and they're creative kids, they were passionate, and they came up with the concept. But it's like, yeah, so it's crazy. Our culture has problems, but yeah, absolutely. So yeah, go on.
Excuse me a minute. I'm gonna turn on my overhead fan because it's
sure. I'm feeling the heat. We are in summer. I mean, I am wearing what I'm wearing for a reason. But yeah, it's very humid. Apparently, Montreal has a humidity thing. I'm signed for a reason. And Daniel, you tell me that Houston also is well known for its humidity. So yeah, we're both.
Texas heat is just unbelievable.
I'm trying to stop from doing this the whole show. Yeah, go on.
So anyway, I created this this persona, this personified principle, um, who is who's at first you think is this loving person. He's talking about how this generation, he's been waiting for centuries,
Right.
for to see this. This is the final coming together of a long process. And the more you listen to him, I mean, again, you just have to read it to get the full impact of it. But uh, the more you listen to him, the more you realize it sees this as the beginning of the destruction of civilization, right? Which he is perversely delighted with. Right? That's his passion, is to destroy civilization. He mocks God, he
Mm,
mocks religion, in a way that actually I think reflects the way a lot of people do think about religion who are atheists
mm.
and whatnot. And then he prophesizes um, prophesize what will come out of this, that this moral flaw of pleasure and self-centeredness will eventually evolve because of you know the flaw in the whole culture. This will become you might say the disease which will spread into the entire culture and ultimately destroy it. And then I just end it by, you know, I walk away.
Right. Well, we'll let people read
Yeah.
it. And again, I mean, we're going to link to the poem and the films. I mean, anyone who hasn't, if you're hearing the show and you haven't read it and or watched the film, you're missing out. So definitely check it out. And we're going to be following this up with something new as well on the subject. So I have a lot of fun ideas for that. And thanks to your poem and what we've done so far, there's a lot to build on. There's a lot of rich material there. So we're not done. Of all other things, I mean, because now we're getting to there. You talked about the tragedy of your generation, right? When you're thinking about, at first, I don't want to say you were starry eyed, right? I don't know how you'd characterize, but you were on a spiritual quest. Even
Naive.
yeah, okay, sure, naive. So yeah, and so the more distance you got from that, the more you zoomed out, the more you saw that there was really something missing, or there was something wrong. And so yeah, you talk about what seemed like the promise of a generation turned into the tragedy of a generation. And what is that tragedy?
Well,
Maybe we can connect
um,
it to today.
well, the the preoccupation of the baby boomer generation, particularly in the 70s and 80s, with money, and personal advancement, um, a really militant version of it too. And this isn't like, your grandfather's getting ahead.
Right,
This was a cutthroat militant. You think of the movie Wall Street, which I think very aptly captured the spirit of those times.
right,
And because of the leadership we had, which became uh, uh, progressively worse, but progressively reflective of the degeneration within the culture itself. I mean, the United States utterly abandoned its commitment to what Roosevelt had desired at the end of the war,
mm,
had he lived, which was the development of the entire underdeveloped world, the former colonial world.
mm,
Um, and instead, we were induced by the British and the Anglo-American establishment in the United States to fight one war after another, one genocidal war after another. Vietnam, Korea, Vietnam, just go down the line. We have been constantly at war since World War II,
right,
and it has kept most of the world in a state of backwardness that uh, that is the reflection of the tragic, the cultural tragedy which occurred in the United States. Um,
right,
so I think that's the reflection of it. I think and the fact that we abandon any sense of a moral purpose to the nation, um,
right.
it it led to several generations without that were never had a sense of that they could participate in a bigger mission in life.
Yeah, and well, that brings us, and again, this is good because this is good fuel for the next film as well. Because one of the themes we take up in The Devil at Woodstock is this whole, the Huxley's island and the idea of the self, right? So there's this idea of self-actualization that became very big. So you're talking about personal advancement, self-advancement, money, and obviously there was more means to do that than there had ever been before. And so, I
Yeah.
was talking with we'll call him a philosopher friend, a lover of wisdom. And, he leveled a bit of a defense of the baby boomers. Not that he was like, I love baby boomers kind of thing, but no hate. But just the idea that it had been the first time, and this is what Julian Huxley observed, and Aldous Huxley was applying these kind of insights into his works as well, from Brave New World to his final work, The Island, which is also the other work that shapes our film, The Devil at Woodstock, where Julian observed that civilization was shifting from a struggle for survival to a struggle for fulfillment. So it was really the first time we're on a mass scale. The question wasn't how do I get enough food in my baby's tummy, essentially, but it was how do I, acquire all the things that I desire, right? That I couldn't have, or that my parents couldn't have, and that now, the world is my oyster, kind of thing.
Mm.
And so that shifts a lot of different things, right? In terms of how your society is organized, if you're going to control that society. It's not necessarily about
Well, it creates, you think of it, it creates a very labile personality
yeah,
because whoever controls the means by which you feel fulfilled,
right,
you'll follow that.
right. And well, yeah, because that's the thing as well. The cynic might say that, well, everybody, will ultimately pursue the same thing under those circumstances, right? That's kind of the Brave New World idea of just kind of the soma culture of just pursuing the things that make you feel good and kind of like blocking out anything that doesn't make you feel good is bad. Number one, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, well, it's just because there's probably something intrinsically bad about that thing. Like, I don't have to investigate further. We'll even just leave it at there, right? Because it's not that
Mm.
sophisticated a system. And the things that make me feel good are good, right? And I should have more of those. And the people who want to stop me or who want to judge that, they're Hitler, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just have this very simplistic model finally, which is largely just based on emotions. You're not having to think about it further than that. I wasn't sure if someone was knocking. I don't think it's me. I thought someone was knocking at the door. So that's another thing, right? So yeah, you said you can then appeal to that, and that's what the Brave New World is. And the only difference is that in Huxley's later novel, he introduces the idea that finally, if you get people to, people will believe that they have achieved the heights of their spiritual actualization, right? So that's more today. That's more a forecast on the psychedelic kind of moksha culture. And I've just seen like again now even ibogaine, some like South African root, like that's a big thing. All the veterans, all the people who committed war crimes, who killed like a bunch of people, you take ibogaine and then you don't feel anything. You don't feel bad about everybody that you murdered, all those families. So it works. So it's great, and we should legalize it tomorrow. That's kind of what the thing was. So that's more Huxley's Island, right? Where like the drugs become more spiritual, but they're not really different, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what they're meant to do. And so yeah, Julian was really at the forefront of that. In that, how are you going to now shape this new thing, this new how are you going to shape this quest for fulfillment such that, you get people to seek the things that ultimately can still be controlled, I guess.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. And so yeah, that gets me to the question of we mentioned Schiller, we alluded to Schiller before. Schiller has a great essay on naive and sentimental poetry.
Mhm.
And the part that I really loved, because it just seemed so insightful, and I was almost shocked that somebody was that insightful about things, especially in an essay about poetry. And at a certain point, he observed that there's the difference between the realist, the character of the realist, who's very much anchored to the real, the practical, and the immediate, and sort of working within the boundaries, conditions of whatever system you're operating in. So you can think of this more as the traditionalist, the conservative, and then you have the idealist who obviously is thinking of something that exceeds or goes beyond just the present or whatever the current choices are, whatever false choices are, but sees something far beyond, is able to see far beyond, you could argue. But yet, again, how's he going to get there? And so Schiller observes that while the realist may stray or err, he's never going to go too far off course. He's too careful to really do anything stupid. But he observes that the fall of the idealist is bottomless, because once the idealist comes to the conclusion that the world he inhabits and the world which he aspires to are infinitely apart, right? That ideal realm is just it's nowhere in sight. Kind of just shrugs his shoulders and like, well, I'm here, so I may as well enjoy whatever this world can offer, since that other one is just out of reach, right? And so that makes me think of the kind of thing you're describing as well, right? Where how do like young idealists who believe in certain ideals that are truly noble and worth fighting for, but it's like if you don't know how to fight for those things, or if you're going to be starry-eyed, right? If you're going to be a schwärmerei, I believe is how you pronounce it, right? A dreamer, but in the worst sense of the word, like you're really,
Farmer.
yeah, schwärmer,
Germans call it a farmer.
yeah. That's arguably more dangerous, right? Or it's a double-edged sword, almost like anything else. But so yeah, there's always this bind that people seem to get caught in. And I do feel like, yeah, I remember when I was younger, you'll always have that older person who's like, I was like you when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And then they became realists, right? So the idealist always, almost like clockwork, the poles shift. And now the idealists are the realists. And it's like, is that all it is? Is it always just this binary kind of clockwork? Or Schiller addresses this, right? And I think we've both looked into this a lot, and it still seems to be the well, there's a reason most people aren't familiar with it. I guess we could observe there because everyone's heard Kant and Enlightenment ideas and John Locke, and this is rammed down people's throats in college and university, and yet Schiller, is like the specialized. If you're like an advanced German student or something, this is when you're supposed to learn about Schiller's lessons on universal history, which kind of points
Mm-hmm.
out what classical civilization got right, what still needs to be worked out, and all these things in a very level-headed and discerning way. Like, why would you teach people that, right? Um, so yeah, maybe you could say something about that. We were talking before. There's always this kind of binary where the hippies represented that kind of idealist, starry-eyed vision at first,
Mm-hmm.
but with that, at first there is follow your heart, right? Be true to your heart, and follow your intuition. Not necessarily bad advice, but it's almost like if people don't play that out, it depends. right? Like you should just always follow your intuition. Sometimes, some days people just want to like, leave their whole family behind and like move to a deserted island or something, and start like, that's not, you don't just want to follow your intuition, right? It needs to be informed or educated, like the heart, right? And so
Mhm.
Schiller's big thing was that the realist and the idealist in their in if the heart is allowed to be fully maturated and developed, that requires the development of the mind, the full development of the mind, and the full development of the mind isn't possible without the development and maturation of one's heart. So they're not really at war, right? The Dionysian sensual drives are not evil or bad in themselves. And Schiller has a great quote on this in his fourth letter on the aesthetical education of man, where he says, nature begins with man as she does with all her other works. She acts for him where he can't yet act alone. And I was just thinking about that, because you hear different ideas about, morality and the senses, and some different discourses are addressed to different people. Whether it's like the epistles of Paul, sometimes he's talking to Corinthians, sometimes he's talking to Romans. He's saying different things, right? And it's like that for a lot of things. So Schiller is just saying that I just think the example, imagine like people didn't have the sex drive and you only decided to reproduce if you felt need or ready. Would civilization even exist today? Right? Like most of life has been wretched for most people. So man has both automatic drives. They're just instincts that they're there. They're there to guide you. They're there to guide the grander plan of things that cannot be entrusted to anybody individually, or even their reasoning or whatnot. There needs to be defaults. And so that, the species will continue to reproduce despite all the morons, right? And like bad decisions and dark overlords that would
Mhm.
prefer that most of the species were wiped out. But nature doesn't stop there, right? That's kind of Schiller's point, that man has the capacity to then come fully online and develop his higher faculties, such that increasing the heart and reason, they're working together, and they're actually making the world better for each of them. So the big problem isn't the battle or the enmity between the heart and the mind so much as the lack of development in
Mhm.
those faculties in our culture, and our education system and our political system. And if you look at it like that, you can account for most of the problems at that level, right? You could go into detail ad infinitum, but if these faculties were fully maturated in people, you'd have very different decisions, and so you'd have very different outcomes.
Well, this is what is so special about Schiller, and is what makes it so germane to our discussion, uh, because uh, when he wrote, his probably his most important work on the aesthetical education of man, uh, he dealt with the question of that what that the mind can understand, as you say, can have a grasp, an academic grasp of many things, but unless the heart impels it to use it for some higher end, it merely becomes, academicism. That it's by shaping the emotions, right, which Schiller uh, realized are that we as human beings are imbued with not just the simple animalistic emotions,
Mm,
which you know all the higher apes, dolphins and others have some form of love,
mm,
that extends beyond simply their progeny, that extends to their group. There's a certain kind of love and loyalty there. This is part of our nature. But what happens uh, with art of the highest kind is that it uh, shapes through one's emotional connection. Uh, it elevates and organizes the heart to become sensitive to the higher emotions. The emotion of agape, which is the highest form of love, which is not just love of all of humanity, but it is actually a love of humanity for the sake of the divine in all human beings.
Mm.
When that's recognized, you know, that this is expressed most powerfully in Beethoven's music, in Mozart's music, in the poetry of Shelley, for example. But it is also, I believe, it's implied even in the tragedies, for example, of Shakespeare. Because you think of what moves a human heart and soul uh, when they're uh, when they're seeing a great tragedy is not just the sort of vicarious agony over what's happening, the horrible tragic things that are happening on the stage to these characters, but it is also an intimation that they would be capable of some. It could have been so different. These people, had they not been tragically flawed by the culture they live in,
Right.
like the culture that Hamlet lived in of Denmark, or the way it's portrayed by Shakespeare at that time, it could have turned out different. They were capable of so much better. You might not express that when you're coming out of the theater after watching a tragedy, but you feel it in your heart because you know what a human being is sometimes by seeing what uh, when we go down the wrong path, what it does.
Yeah.
So I think this Schiller understood um, this this duality in the human soul between our practical, day to day survival instincts and the greatness. He expressed this. The work that always had a deep impact on me. One of maybe three works that are kind of in my pantheon of literary works is Schiller's On the Sublime,
Right.
because he takes this principle and he demonstrates it in its most powerful and, you might say, extreme form, which is in the feeling of the sublime,
Right.
which one is meant uh, to feel simultaneously the limits of one's physical, practical day to day life, um, and the smallness, and you could say in the philosophical sense the meaninglessness of it, but yet create a powerful intimation of this greatness which lives in all of us. That we actually have we feel when we're in the presence of the sublime, whether it's in nature, like I was talking about earlier, or whether it's witnessing um, a, a sublime sacrifice for the sake of some higher thing. Think of Joan of Arc as an example. Think of Jesus Christ, the
Right.
ultimate example of it. When we're in the face of something sublime like that, we feel very powerfully and genuinely that we are something greater than our physical being. We are a soul, which is infinite and eternal.
Right.
That it can't be limited by mere physical reality. It can overcome physical reality, uh, which happens in great art in different kinds of ways. It can be induced in a number of different ways. But for me, this is the um, part of the tragedy of what happened in my generation is that outside of a very rare few examples, my world literature teacher being one of them.
Right. Shout out.
Yeah, yeah, Dr. Maloney, and but we increasingly, ever since the 1960s, uh, children and young people have not been allowed to have access to this. It just simply isn't there anymore. Now, there's an
Right.
interesting phenomenon going on now in the West, and especially of young um, Zoomers, 20 somethings, actually. returning to seeking out classical art, music, and religion.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting. There's a certain uh, asymptotic kind of playing out,
Right.
of the emptiness and the meaninglessness of the cultural paradigm
Right.
that came in the 1960s, which is so deeply felt now by young people that they know this can't be all there is. And
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, again, I I was just marking down because yeah, no, that's a great point. It's like the real it's we're coming full circle here. We have more questions, so we're not letting you go yet. But in that you talked about the tragedy of your generation, and that the real life tragedy is the thing that's kind of woken up younger people. And I know people have different thoughts on that, and some takes are like, oh, the young people are all messed up, right? Gen Z is crazy or da da da. Sure, there's some radical ideas, but there are some radical ideas back then. So first,
mm-hmm.
yeah, and there's always been radical ideas. I mean, so yeah, we can take a step back there, take a beat. And yeah, but there's a kind of real life tragedy playing out, right? The Western world has had so many accomplishments, right? Made so many beautiful things. There are a lot of amazing cultures and civilizations out there. But I was talking with a friend and from who's from China, and I was like, but is it near like if you think tourism, like sure you could visit all sorts of places, but like can you really compare most of those places to like visiting Rome, right? Parts of France or Greece. And there's really nothing else like it anywhere in the world, at least that still remains, right? Maybe there were in the past, but just in terms of architecture and you know what I mean, like the things that have remained and that really are emblems of past eras. I mean, there's something truly special and exceptional. Somehow these kind of marvels were made possible.
Well, the Western Christian civilization actually made real discoveries about universal principles
hmm,
in art. I mean, look at the column behind you. Those Greek temples, you know, were based on profound principles in geometry, which uh, have a corresponding uh, uh, kind of resonance in the human appreciation of beauty. The golden section, for example.
yeah,
This was based on a discovery. The discoveries made by J.S. Bach, in the well-tempered musical system. It was a scientific discovery, very much in tandem and very much affected by Kepler, before him, who made his breakthroughs in astronomy based on discoveries of these universal principles. When it was applied to music, it led to an absolute explosion of creativity in music that has never been equaled anywhere in the world, and until now.
no, and it's
You know,
true. And look, we can unabashedly, where else is there a Beethoven, right? Or if you
yeah.
just look at the density of compositions, like a Beethoven, a Mozart, a Brahms, a
Well, and
Schubert,
and the fact that
a
people in
Schumann,
all of
that's
these
crazy, right?
and the
That's
fact that people in all of these other cultures recognize that.
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody hates, Germany for, well, maybe some do, but that's a long, different story. But yeah, no, but you know what I mean? It's universally recognized that this is the apex, at least up until this point. And all that to say, right? So Western civilization has, achieved all these landmarks. And so obviously some people today look aghast, and there's a lot of cynicism, there's a lot of pessimism, and it's just like, should we just prep they're prepping the suicide pods, right? But you're mental, you're depressed, maybe you just need a suicide pod, right? It's not your society, it's not that the ideals and visions of past leaders and generations have been abandoned. You should just kill yourself, right? Let's get and there's going to be big, nice, fancy businesses that, do the suicide pod better than others, right? You'll have nicer music before you die or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, the fall has been quite steep. We're coming full circle there. Uh, but at the same time, the irony is that people see there as a tragedy. And so they're kind of disgusted. right? And that disgust is more among the younger people because they have still so much to lose, right? They're not on their way out. They kind of have to live with whatever comes next. That's they're going to be picking up the slack. So it's a very interesting time to be in, and young people are definitely growing up faster, and they're hit with way more information. Like on TikTok, right? You have like 19-year-olds that are like multimillionaires. Like you watch some of them, they have baby faces, and they're like, "Here's how I made $35,000 this month. Like, I'll show you how I made it." And of course, whatever they made it, day trading or doing something, or selling whatever they're selling. But the you just didn't have that in the past, where people come online a lot sooner, and a significant number of them, because they see that a lot of stuff is kind of fake or a scam, they're like, well, I better do something so that I am free to pursue my own life. Because if I just count on the bullshit kind of propaganda dreams that I've been told about hard work, I will be poor, or probably a lot worse. And the suicide pod will come a lot earlier. So it's having all sorts of interesting effects, but also culture, right? There's a recognition that the culture has degenerated. And again, we can say what we want about these movies, but like two of the biggest movies right now were made by Gen Z kids, right? So Backrooms was made by like, he's 21. His Backrooms concept, which was a concept on Reddit. His films were going viral on YouTube. Like he developed his own YouTube channel, made his own films, right? You can just do stuff today, right? Like that's the thing now. So by 16, he was being interviewed by like big sort of film shows, and like just talking about his concepts and his process and all that. And Obsession is the other one, which I went to see in the theaters, and it's actually very good. I grew up on horror movies, so I kind of have a nostalgia with that. I can always enjoy a good horror movie. I was like, wow, that actually managed to scare me. That's it's good. The guy was 26. So there are these young creators who are kind of like the old Hollywood, big production studios. They're like, we're spending $400 million on shit, right? That's making no money. They spent like $750 million on the Joker, which was just like absolute garbage.
Or
And
this
Obsession,
or Supergirl, which
yeah,
is losing money.
yeah, Obsession was made for $750,000, and it's broken 200,000, if not 200, if not 300 million at the box office. It's 300 million.
Hmm.
So that's crazy, right? And it's because there's creative people who are actually passionate, and they were allowed to do what they wanted and to pursue their vision.
Well,
So
think if we joined that phenomenon with Schiller's idea of what the role of art actually is, this would be a very powerful thing. We could hijack the control of popular culture.
one film, one film, right? There are films we can think about it, and maybe this will get us to our. Maybe we can, I don't want to keep you here all night here, but we're talking about it now. So yeah, there's all these films. We think of what's a famous film that you liked or that you always remember. If somebody asks you for like a big movie that you remember watching or that had a big. I don't know if you remember.
I don't know, Braveheart.
Okay, sure, Brave. But you got these film. One film can have a huge impact, right, on the collective psyche and the culture, and just setting a tone and a trend, as these new films are, right? Like everybody's looking at, okay, Obsession, Backrooms, that's crazy. How do we? It's changing the conversation. So yeah, one or two good films. The way this kind of art is consumed and the way it can reach people, the way it's accessible, because you can always watch it at different levels. Um, and so I was reading this article. We'll get into we'll end on a little bit of poetics, maybe, and maybe tie that into everything that we've been talking about. You are a poet, so we maybe want to get you to sort of get on your soapbox a bit to close out. Yeah, I was just talking about how I read an article on a website called Classical Wisdom, I do have the article here, and it was comparing Aristotle's poetics to Plato's poetics, and the title was "Can Poetry Fix Us?" And it was about the question of what is the role of poetry in society and of ultimately art. Um, so I want to get a quote here from it. Basically, though, they're comparing Aristotle's idea of poetics, who Aristotle is supposedly the student, the diplomatic student who challenges his master's high ideal of poetry, where Plato was criticizing the poets, or he was challenging them, or he was inviting them. Depends how you want to read it, and depends how you interpret Plato's sense of humor, right, and his wit. He's challenging poets that if the images you're making, your imitations can be as excellent as possible. They can be the best thing that anyone's ever done, right? You can craft the most beautiful and riveting images, but they can't just be judged on that alone, right? Poetry isn't just about how good your images are. There are still objective standards, which these images, like anything else, when it comes to truth or philosophy or morality, they're not above these things. And so he was kind of just exploring. Plato was just looking at, well, what are the effects, right? If the wrong kinds of images proliferate in society, like what happens if we just popularize partying and promiscuity? Like, what kind of society are we going to have, really, if that's the thing that is idolized, right? Just being a big shot
And so he and so he
rapper
poem
or become a
and so he
warlord.
polemically poses, in the Republic, well, maybe we should just not have poetry, or maybe it
Right?
should
Yeah,
be,
he's like,
or should it be regulated?
maybe we should just get
Um,
rid of it then.
yeah,
If
if it's
poets
so
aren't,
dangerous
yeah, and if
as
poets
the
aren't smart enough, right? If poets can't figure it out, then yeah, maybe in the ideal republic we get rid of it, and we'll only allow hymns, right, praising the gods and virtue. It's funny at the end of the day, right? What he's doing is actually funny, and you hear academics, right, and critics look at this stuff, and as the young folks say these days, SMH, shaking my head. It's like they've not no sense of humor, no appreciation of the wit, no appreciation for the concepts that Plato's trying to highlight. And I mentioned it in the last chat I had with Matt, where there's a great quote from Beethoven, where he was asked, like, what is the point of music? What is the purpose of music? And someone gave an Apollonian gave the typical Apollonian or like moralist, Puritan response, if you will. No shade intended, but if it's to elevate the soul, music is to elevate the soul. Okay, Beethoven said nonsense. If I compose a march, you want to march. If I compose a waltz, you want to waltz. If I compose a mass, you want to pray.
mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what Plato was pointing out, that there are effects, right? And you could say, they are Dionysian in the sense that they're transformative, right? Like the different kinds of sounds will elicit different emotions from you. And so, we could even Plato, or Plato does level a defense of Dionysus, in the sense that if Dionysus is the god of these altered states and of poetry, then
imagination,
in the
you might
law,
say imagination.
yes, in the laws, the most important chorus of his set of choruses is the Dionysian chorus, and he says he's playing around. He says, "Well, shouldn't the most wisest in society perform that be that chorus? So shouldn't it be the old men?" But then he's like, "Well, we'd have to have music that's like adequate for the old men." For the Dionysian chorus, and he plays around because he compares you could have different kinds of dramas. And he said, if we had a comedy, or if we had a love drama, or if we had a tragedy, which ones would the different segments of the population like? And he said the children would love the puppet show, of course, that would be their favorite. The young people would love the romance. I believe it was a romance. And the older people would most prefer the tragedy, right? And so he's saying if we want to have the noblest kind of theater, it should have the best kind of chorus, and so who should man that? So all this, so he's playing around with all that, right? And he's having fun with it, which most people seem to, they kind of lost the thread there. So it really depends. The art and the poetry can have all sorts of different effects, and that was Plato's argument. And then you have Aristotle, who comes in, who this article on classical wisdom, I do have an axe to grind with. His classical wisdom is the name of the website and the Substack, and they purport to be about classical wisdom. But as I was telling you, one of the most scandalous things I've ever heard was in one of their articles where they essentially made fun of Socrates and blamed him for his own murder, saying if he would only taken the sophist and the art of rhetoric more seriously rather than trashing it all the time, maybe he wouldn't have gotten his ass killed. That's what they said. Literally, if I can find it,
it's like saying if Jesus had just backed off a bit and going after the Pharisees.
Yeah, no, that's literally. And so I was like, what is
exactly the same thing?
That perked I was like, what is this publication? Because it's called Classical Wisdom, and it was quite popular, and it still is. And so then they take the side of Aristotle, and they said, yeah, Aristotle, he was Plato's student, but he had a different idea, but he was very diplomatic about it. And he says, well, imitation's actually good. And then they quote Aristotle giving the example of how humans learn through imitation, right? Children like to copy, and so they copy things and they learn that way. And he gives his whole kind of spiel on that. And so catharsis is kind of the central idea of the role and power of art in society. It's to give people these cathartic experiences. And people love to talk about, but pretty much you give people this sensual kind of or ritualistic, you could say, experience that makes them feel all kinds of intense emotions, or rivets them and awes them, entertains them. It could be a rock show. A rock show can be very cathartic. Taylor Swift concerts very cathartic. These things have all sorts of pyrotechnics and stuff. So that's kind of Aristotle's idea, and the poetics is all about the structure of creating the magic of a work of art that will awe people. And the article goes on to basically accurately, because these are learned people, that our culture, our art, Hollywood, is Aristotelian through and through. And I had been having a conversation with James Dellingpole. Well, I gave the example of what do we think, good movies, right? Aristotle's poetics today is, well, how do you make a good movie? What are the big hits? You think of a Top Gun, or a smash show that has 10 seasons, like The West Wing, where the director, the writer for The West Wing, Aaron Sorkin, who's these big Hollywood, directors, he was saying it's all in Aristotle's poetics in one of these master classes clips that they showed. It's all, read Aristotle's poetics. It's all there. And when I heard that, I was like, it is, right? Because when you see the whole point of Hollywood is to create that magic, right? Those illusions that enrapture people. But it's okay, West Wing, I mean, is this really what it's like inside the White House? No blackmail, pedophile cults, and weapons laundering, war crime, none of that, right? It's just some aristocratic old timer guy who wants to do good, and isn't afraid to, there's grit. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty and get in there. It's nothing like that, right, in reality. And Top Gun, the US military, the industrial, all the war movies, right? And how they portray, the heroic sort of mission. It's unfortunately, it's a lie, right? It's
and unfortunately, these
done
film
well.
is such a powerful influence in our society that much of our popular speech now contains references to, to film and to characters in films.
Yeah.
And what that's the way starts to become the way people, the lens through which they view the world.
And
And
that wouldn't be so bad if the films were, able to bring people to something else and they weren't just meant to impress people by virtue of, the craft itself, right? And how well the images are done. But I was just thinking as well, because like we do want to give people, we want to give credit. Not everybody can go the whole way, let's say, on like, or has time for a full classical education, let's say, right? Not everybody has time for, not everybody can read the entire or has had the opportunity in their lifetime or their experience to just, or the leisure to read Homer through and through, Dante through and through, Aeschylus through and through, know all the references. But they should still have access, right, to beautiful ideas, to the sublime. And that's the point of culture, though, right? Whether it's in film or whatnot, culture is reflexes. And before people really know, and you said it with Hamlet, before people really know what they think about something, they know how they feel something about it, or they know how they feel about it. And their cues for how they think about a thing is really based on how they feel about it. And that can be misleading. But the whole point of good culture is that even if somebody is not erudite and has done all, the whole, all the classics, done the whole canon, and they've done their whatever dissertations on, the wasteland or whatever, they have reflexes. They've been exposed to certain images and stories and ideas so that they already have a reflex. When they're exposed to certain things, they already know how to feel about it. Because the problem is and that's the point of art, because if you don't have that and you start talking about abstract philosophical or metaphysical ideas, which have real bearing on reality, right? And all our governance structures and politics and war and peace and all these things, unless you have those reflexes or you've gotten the actual deep classical education, you don't know how to respond, right? When you hear a discussion about certain things, right? You have no reflexes. You have no past relationship with that. And so art and culture is there to build that, right? To lay a foundation. So when you take that away from people, right? They know Top Gun, they know Mission Impossible. Tom Cruise drove like a motorcycle, over the cliff. It was very well done. The last two Mission Impossibles, very well done. I liked it, but that's not, you know what I mean? If you stop there, and then when we want to talk about these things, people don't know how to feel. It's not even that they don't know how to think; they don't know how to feel about it. So you sure as hell know they won't know how to think about it. And if they do, it's probably going to be based on whatever reflexes they have from pop culture, right? And was this mentioned as like some conspiracy on The Simpsons or something?
well, that's the challenge we have as poets and purveyors of art, more broadly. It's different than any other time in history because we're intervening into a culture which uh, which is degenerate in its core outlook,
Mm.
but has the aid of mass, mass media and the means, it's a hegemonic, ever present um, reality, and to intervene in it is different than, say, it came to mind um, uh, the fact that when Edgar Allan Poe wrote The Raven, it became wildly popular. I mean, it was read at all over the place. People read it out loud. People bought it and read it. He was regularly asked to recite it in front of groups of 3, 4, 5,000 people. Um, and it struck me, well, what was the, you could say what the charm of that poem was. It is a tragedy in a certain, in a certain way. It has the principle of tragedy underlying it, but it evokes this feeling of intense longing for something beyond our physical realm. In this case, a person who's passed, and the almost uh, uh, an almost obsessive pleasure in engaging in that sorrow and that longing. That's actually more true and real and noble than simply moving on or something. And people just they feel moved by this because it speaks to something eternal in us. In this case, the
Right.
principle of love. It's not just a person; it's love. But he wrote that at a time when the culture was, was there were many poetry was very popular, and there were many popular poets at the time. People read poetry. They read literary journals,
Yes.
not just not just intellectuals in universities like today, but common people. And this is what we've lost, and what we've got to bring back. And in my view, um, I'm going to be giving a lecture, a class for Promethean Pack sometime within the next couple of months. But I was thinking of uh, beginning it with saying one of the greatest heresies in our world today is the idea that there's no connection between poetry and you know and uh, and and politics and how the world is governed. It has everything to do with it because it actually addresses what you were talking about, the most fundamental emotions that we have that make us human. Poetry does that in a more powerful way than anything does. You think about it, a lot of people will tell me, well, I don't go for poetry. That's, that's highfalutin stuff. And I'm more concerned with practical affairs. But, yet they're the same people, who will be moved by, a eulogy at a funeral of someone
Right.
they love, someone who read a very well composed greeting card that says something
Right.
beautiful and meaningful, you know.
Oh,
And
cry
what
like a
is it?
bitch.
That's poetry.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. And poetry, the
It's
word poesis means making, and it's ultimately image making. And
mm,
poetry is really the mother of all the arts because I mean, it's kind of the primal art, the primordial art by which then image making and all the uh, under the guidance of all the other muses sort of unfolds. And again, some of the people you describe, they just lack reflexes, right? Like
mm,
even if they had the reflexes, they'd understand these things immediately, even if they weren't, the most sophisticated and educated people. They would understand fundamentally what you meant. It would not be abstract or esoteric or philosophical or idealistic. They would have a sense of it because they've experienced it viscerally through art, and that's the point of the art, is to make ideas visceral and embodied, and to do so in a way that is pleasurable, right, that is entertaining, but it's not just that, right,
mhm.
and but it's not in any way opposed to that, which is always, again, people get really weird, right, they get real crazy with like, oh, Plato, he's like Kim Jong-un, and like, art, morality, what are you talking about, are you Hitler's reincarnation, or they start to lose their heads because they've gone through a certain system, right, which is ultimately an Enlightenment legacy that has divorced Naturwissenschaft and Geisteswissenschaft
Mm.
to such a degree that people just can't fathom how the two might be, wedded, in a kind of harmonious matrimony, as a Schiller
Mm.
could, or as a Keats could, right? When he famously uttered those lines, which we don't have to repeat because everyone knows them.
Give me 1 second. I got to turn on the light because it's getting dark in here.
Sure. And we will, yeah, we will, we don't want to keep you. How long have we been going for? Yeah. I mean, we'll,
Well, Depends on what you want to do.
Let's no, okay, you know what? Because this is the thing that I forgot to do you have any of your poems with you?
I have both books here. What do you want to hear?
Okay, so let's hear a poem or two. Let's start with poems unwritten. I would like to hear that one from you because I've recorded it in the past, but it would be nice to hear you read that one.
Okay, you can find it. No, I don't remember
Take your
what.
time. I mean, number one, we have the magic of television, so take
Oh
your
yeah, here it is.
okay.
All right, poems unwritten. Sometimes, when the light and the mists of the day settle holy and soft on the edge of the night, when the sights and the sounds of the world melt away, and the vision that lives in the soul takes flight, that feeling comes on I felt since I was young, of poems unwritten and songs unsung. Like a shadow that flits across the moonbeams, thrills the soul all the more for its dark mystery, or the memory in daytime of last night's dreams, like another world under the surface we see, like that thought that lives on the tip of the tongue, are those poems unwritten and songs unsung. In the gaze of the lover who grasps for a word to embody the feeling that's shared in the eyes, or forgotten strains of a song long unheard, whose sad memory deep in the heart still lies. Like all the new thoughts that ever have sprung, are those poems unwritten and songs unsung. It's there in the child as he sees the sublime and the greatness and beauty of life unfurled. It lives in the instant, but outside of time, and confronts and comforts the old who must soon leave this world. It sleeps in all souls, though the lyre be unstrung, those poems unwritten and songs unsung.
Hmm, beautiful. And it was just making me think you're talking about the creative principle right there, right? And it's that exists in potentiality, whether people ever fully ever realize it or express it or not, it exists, number one. And you were talking about that, this creative principle as it had been expressed in the past and had inspired the earlier generations, right? During in your time. Uh, and that obviously there's a great enmity with the Zeusian principle. Um, and it seems like that it always comes back to that, right? If we really understand it, if we know what's what, that creative principle is always there, right? It cannot die because it's immortal, right? And it's an innate in man. And I think it was before we started recording. I've never been in the desert, but apparently, if I'm ever in the desert and I stare up at the night sky, night, it will kick my ass, right? Because it gives you such a visceral. I've been in the country and you'll when all the soot is gone, right, and you can actually see the stars. It's beautiful. So yeah, you have an intimation, right, of something deeper, and a lot of work has to go into training that out of people, which is like I don't think people realize how much work has to go into training that out of people.
Well, that's what I said in the introduction to my second book of poems. I ended the introduction by saying the poems. Let's see. Wait a minute.
Take your time.
Um, well, now I can't find it, but that's I made that point that this is naturally this is what a healthy human mind will naturally respond to. That it has to be that there's a particular kind of mental and spiritual violence that has to be done
Right.
to the mind, abuse of the mind to pervert it to not be responsive to this kind of thing.
Yeah, and it can't
Um,
be, it's not just minor, right? It has to be major, like actual trauma or protracted violence, right? Because just one bad experience or two, that usually doesn't do it, right? Then you meet someone who, still has the spark, and you're reminded maybe of, oh yeah, maybe I got off course for a while, uh, right? But that's not what you get now, because you can, there's people, you can run into people your whole life, and it's like they haven't really seen that spark in anyone they've encountered, or if they have, right, they've been so traumatized, right, so there's no trust. And
well,
so no
I was
trust.
gonna mention earlier when we were discussing the 1960s
Don't mind me.
and the experience of my generation, uh, the trauma of the assassinations of Kennedy, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and Martin Luther King had a profound effect on our generation because all of what we considered to be noble principles of humanity that we saw reflected in uh, those great men in various ways, um, to see it not just cut down and taken away, but then what any intelligent and uh, reasonable person knew was a complete false narrative about him, the lone assassination theories and everything. Everyone who wasn't deliberately deluding themselves, as many people were. When you think of the vehemence with which the opponents of anybody who said that there was a conspiracy uh, went after them. Those who went after them was really vehement and spiteful and everything because they knew deep down that there was something terribly wrong, but they wanted to acquiesce to it out of cowardice rather than committing themselves to fighting for the justice and the truth of the matter. So when my generation saw that occur, it induced a profound cynicism about our entire culture. That we would not only destroy anything noble when it appeared, but then lie to ourselves about it and go on as if nothing had happened. So that fueled a great deal of the underlying psychology of the counterculture. The aversion to the hypocrisy we saw in our. Of course, we projected the hypocrisy apparent in that on all aspects of the culture, religion,
Right.
education, war, everything. We rejected out of hand everything about the culture, but that was a spiritual violence that was done, and I think it's analogous to what's being done, sort of as a constant cultural thing, in the recent decades to young people. It's being driven into them that there's no truth, there's no justice. Look at the way these people are being treated. Look at the way those people are being treated. Look at the hypocrisy of American foreign policy. Look at you know, uh, what these greedy, billionaires are doing. And so you just get this profound cynicism about humanity, and there's no positive uh, 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 example being put forward to actually, create an alternative.
Yeah, and that's by design rather than
Yeah.
actually being the reality. It's by design. And the sooner people understand that, the better they will feel, right? The more liberated they will be. And yeah, they can, again, that spark, that immortal something is cannot be killed. And I think the Zeusian principle intuitively knows that, which is why it works very hard and is very organized, because it ultimately knows that. And again, we could go on for a while, and I feel like we could go down some more fun rabbit holes here. But maybe you want to do you want to send us off with it. I would love to hear it as that, and we can conclude on a poetic note. And you're welcome to add
Be,
any other thoughts because we could go for a long time. I have more thoughts, but then it might just become another show.
well, that's a I'd, I'd always be willing. Uh,
No, that's a
let's see
great
if I can find it.
poem.
I think
Take your
it's in my
time.
first.
Any other last side thought, or just Dana Joy himself? He was giving an interview and he said he when he was organizing congressmen to fund the poetry out loud competitions, and people were
Oh
like,
yeah.
"We're not going to put money for that. That's stupid." Right? These were
Hmm.
congressmen, and he
Hmm.
looked him in the eyes and he said, "There was an English teacher when you were in high school, and the guy was shook because there had been an English teacher who had inspired him, right? Who had awakened him. And Dana Joy was saying that that's the thing that we need to give everyone else. You had it. Why can't they have it?" And you described the same thing, right? You had one world literature teacher and he awakened that spark in you, right? And, you know,
Yeah.
by whatever circumstances and, grace, it, you kept it alive, which also takes work, right? Um, or you kept it burning, I guess you could say. And yeah, so that's always there. And again, so there's a lot of work, even to make sure that you don't get one good world literature teacher, it seems these days, if you want to be a cynic, because that's all it really takes
Yeah.
to really kindle that.
Yeah. And
So,
they should at least have that. Um, well, that's what this poem is about. It's simply called It. It plays upon the glowing sunset boughs when shadows have enveloped all below, and distant, otherworldly thoughts arouse a passion in the poet's soul to go beyond the earth, beyond the darkening sky, where only unembodied spirits fly. It beckons coyly in that certain look the woodland flower wears in the morning light, half hidden in the shadows by a brook which murmurs gently as if to invite the mind in endless beauties to immerse, unfolding in its little universe. It guides by unseen force the flock of birds that swirls and soars upon the twilight air, and all that lives and breathes as if by words unspoken, though however unaware, yet dance to its mysterious music, sways, and with our noblest thoughts of freedom plays. And then it sometimes visits in a form that haunts like some gigantic destiny, the dark and threatening beauty of a storm whose coming flash of jagged light we see, yet feel as all around the thunder rolls a primal freedom sleeping in our souls. But most I see it in another's eyes, that sparkle when a thought is born within, or fill with tears when holy passions rise that speak of what could be or could have been. And I am in the presence of a force that is all other earthly beauty's source.
mm,
Oh,
yep. So, Daniel, I will thank you for being so generous with your time and joining us. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll be back again next week.